by Black 365. We're going to break.
It's almost time to connect.
On the next episode of Connect TV by Black 365, we're going to break down the Black Panther movie from a woke and black revolutionary perspective.
Then you'll go beyond the fiction and meet real Black Panthers. All that and more on the next episode of Connect.
Tune in.
I think it really says that people need to come together as a community. It was just a lot of messages that I feel like are so relevant for right now. On a big scale, small scale, personal level, I would recommend everybody seeing it. I'm impressed, and I'm not even a huge...
So my name is Daniel Williams. I just saw Black Panther. This movie is a great message for black kids, for black adults. You just really get to see cultures from different sides of the world come together, and they really portray a struggle that's going on in all different places, whether it's a cultural bias, whether it's a misunderstanding through communications of culture. This movie just puts it all together, and you can see the damaged parts of us, and you can see the thriving parts of our community, bro. And it was just a really great movie. It depicted it all perfectly. It told a great story about women, about men, men's place towards women. You know, like it was a great movie. Yeah.
All right, everybody. So welcome back to another episode of Let's Buy Black 365. I am your host, Nataki.
And I'm Tyler Wakanda.
And we also have with us today our esteemed guest, Will
Jones. How you doing?
So, you know, everybody knows that everything has exploded over the last weekend. I think the estimates were up to, was it 200?
200.
No,
about 200.
200 million
yeah.
In terms of the sales. And so there are a range of emotions happening in the Black community. You have some people who are cheering Wakanda. We have others who are like, who cares? We have others who are upset at the mass exodus of funds from the Black community to people who don't look like us. But either way, we're having this discussion tonight because we will let you know when we get into a deeper dive of spoilers that may, you know, and where you may want to turn off if you don't want to hear this. But this whole episode is about how to deconstruct, or it's about the deconstruction of the Black Panther film. And first, all three of us have seen it. We also have another guest coming on later in the show who is a Black Panther, because as much as we're talking about these fictional Black Panthers, we also want to acknowledge Black revolutionaries and real Black heroes who have been, you know, laying it down for us for years. So with that, we'll jump right in.
Yeah.
All right. So I know for me personally, like the movie kind of exemplified a whole bunch of different things that afflict the Black community, you know, here or abroad. You know, you have the like revolutionary aspect of it. You have the what some would say the integrationist aspect of it. You have the elitism. You have the poor class and all. Just so many different dynamics within the movie.
All right. And so, Will, what were your thoughts on?
Wow. Yeah, I had an opportunity to see it a couple of times over the weekend, and I really enjoyed it. First of all, the thing I was looking for was to make sure it was going to be a good movie. Right. You know, it's like with all this hype and all of the, you know, attention it was getting, I was like, man, just make sure it's good first. Right. And it was a great film. It was a great entry, you know, for all the comic geeks out there watching the movies. I thought it was a great entry, one of the best entries into the Marvel universe. And I think in terms of the things that they're talking about and the things that will give people an opportunity to discuss, I thought he was able to squeeze a whole lot into like 2 hours and some change. I thought he did a great, job of taking so much history, so much discussion, so much debate, and putting it into a 2-hour movie. I thought that was, 2+ hours. It was great.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So, without the spoilers, we're going to start with, big picture positives. And so I guess I'll share mine. I am very critical of the film. However, what I appreciated is, even for all of my criticism, and those are pretty heavy, this is still, I guess, cinematically, and the cinematography and everything, the best movie I've ever seen, hands down. Like, there's nothing close. Nothing even a close second.
That's a lot of movies out there.
Yeah, I know. And I've got favorites that I've seen enough times to have the whole script memorized. So that the wardrobe. I have never seen anything on TV where I'm like, I want that, I want that, I want that, I want that. I would also say that the role of seeing strong Black women, I think there are pros and cons to that. I'll talk about the cons later, but the imagery of the women and their steadfastness, their commitment to community, to their people, and just all of the women, just really were incredible. So, I think those were, and one more, the environmental message. I've been a member, or I've been very in tuned with the environmental movement, actually since elementary school. I was in 2nd or 3rd grade. They introduced a recycling program, and I've shared the story before. I heard Marvin Gaye's Mercy, Mercy Me, the ecology. And I was like, why would I not treat the planet well? Why would I not, do things that help the planet not be in peril? And so, I think I was in second or 3rd grade when that happened. And so I really appreciated the environmental message within the film, and how much taking care of the earth played into the role of what they were able to do.
Right.
For me, I know it was, and I don't want to bite any of your points, so I'm gonna try to come up with something.
we can echo each other's points. I don't know that.
To that point, definitely the women, like the especially because of how society, mainstream media is now. Just to see the women in the roles in which they played, and it wasn't just one type of Black woman. It was like several types of Black women that were very inspirational, aspirational. Wardrobe definitely. Like, I'm telling you, in fact, I was trying to get my tail on the phone as soon as I finished seeing it. And it's like, look, you need to ship me some stuff. But,
that casino scene. I was like, both the sisters was like, I want the red, and when she was coming down the stairs, a little,
absolutely dope. The wardrobe,
and you can do martial arts in these dresses. I'm like, why do I not own these?
Telling you, and the what they did with technology, and just showcasing and I'm trying not to spoil it, but just showcasing the breadth of how you can use technology, how we use technology. I think really.
And I think it's an interesting narrative, because when you look at it from a European perspective, technology is always used to take over the planet, to destroy, to conquer, to do this. But in Wakanda, technology is used to protect, to build, to thrive, to share, to create, in harmony with. And I think that's an important message. Because we have so many people who think environmentalism and technology are opposites, and it's just because the examples that we have are by people who do not represent the good side of it.
Gotcha.
But before we move on, I want to show a clip that was really funny. It went viral a while back, and I think it kind of shares some of the sentiment that people have had lately.
All the time. So we sitting here looking at this dope ass Black Panther poster, and the conclusion that we have come to is that this is what white people get to feel all the time.
All the time. All the time.
Since the beginning of cinema.
All the time.
You get to feel empowered like this and represented.
This is what y'all feel like all the time? I would love this country too.
So
That's awesome.
I love our people. I love,
That's cool.
you know.
So flavorful. We always give it the sauce and the juice whenever we do it.
And so I really think that, and I'm sorry, let me.
So flavorful. We always give it the sauce and the juice.
There we go. Sorry about that. So, you know, I think the takeaway, and that kind of leads us to where we are tonight, because we do have a range of emotions that are happening in the Black community.
Right.
Some, it's an overwhelming sense of pride. And for some people, it's the first time they're like, wow, being African is a good thing.
Exactly.
And for those of you who are waking up and feeling that, you know, welcome. And so, but there are others who are very frustrated because, you know, there are Black entities and Black media and Black films, and you know, we look at things like Sankofa that Halle Garima did, and other films that have showcased Africans in warrior roles. I'm thinking about the film Quilombo, about the uprising. I mean, it didn't have the cinematic effects, but the storylines of Black warriors have been out there. And so there is some frustration with the, you know, why is it when someone who doesn't look like us tells our story that we gravitate to that, and not just with our consumption in terms of, you know, intellect, but our financial consumption. And this is Black mass consumerism on an exponential scale.
Yeah, you're right, exactly that. Like and it just begs the question as far as with that aspect, the damage that has been done just over the years by, you know, colonization and enslavement and stuff like that, and the condition of our people and the mentality that goes on now, you know, it exemplifies that in how we interact and engage with, you know, our own work in comparison to those that are produced by somebody else.
Yeah. Well, I just also think it speaks to the power of science fiction and fantasy and imagery. You know, like for me, I look at and study Afrofuturism, you know, which really this film kind of encompasses. And I think the reason why that's so important is because part of the reason why this film was received the way it has been received is because these are Black superheroes. You know what I'm saying? Right. And to see yourself, when you talk about a heroic character, you're talking about a character without limitations. You know, if you're talking about fantasy, these are characters without limitations. So this is looking at Africa without limitations. These are looking at African people without limitations. And that, to me, is what's drawing these audiences. Because we've had Black superheroes in film before, but we haven't had any connected to the continent. So I think those two things together, it was drawing Black folks out. Because we had Blade, you know, we had Spawn, you know, we had, you know, if you want to talk about on a comedic level, you know, we had Robert Townsend, Meteor Man. We had, you know, but those characters, right? Don't get me started on Hancock. But,
I didn't see it.
Oh, yeah, you don't, yeah. But, yeah. But it's just that this superhero is connected to the continent.
Okay. So we're going to take a break and we're going to do a deeper dive into the deconstruction. Not the spoilers yet, but we're going to take a break and we'll be right back. All right, and we're back. All right, so we talked about some of the pros. We talked about some of the cons. Coming up in the show, you know, one of the things that we want to point out are some of the political implications. So we showed some of the viral videos that have gone out and some people's feedback. We're going to welcome to the show in a little bit a real Black Panther, because as much as we talk about the futuristic side, and, you know, when we look at, you know, TV and film as escape, we also need to recognize, you know, what is happening in the real world. So we're going to welcome Sister to the show to talk to us about that. But before we do that, want to show another image that there we go. All right. So before we get to that, I did want to get from you brothers. You shared your likes and all that. Without the spoilers, what were some of your criticisms of the film?
Without the spoilers?
Yeah. Are there any without the spoilers?
I would say, if I can think of one, it's hard to do without the spoilers. But okay. I'm gonna try to work with me, family. I'm trying to frame it. Maybe the stereotypical things that you would see in any production that is outside of our community, done by people outside of our community, and what that may entail and look like. Stay with us till after the second part. I think you'll get what I was saying.
Do you have one?
Criticism, not so much as I think it allows for critical thought. Like after seeing the film, I think it opens the door to have certain discussions. So it wasn't necessarily anything in the film that just jumped out at me. Once again, there's certain things I want to say.
Right.
I can't go
we can hold up.
Yeah.
We can hold up.
Yeah.
So let's go ahead and bring our guest into the discussion so that she can weigh in. She's been here with us from the beginning, and we're so honored to have this warrior elder sister with us. This is Nana Njinga, who is an active Black Panther member out of Baltimore, Maryland, and she is joining us tonight, introduced by way of Mama Pam Africa from the MOVE organization, which many of you are familiar with the story and the history. Some people are not. That that famous song "You Dropped the Bomb on Me" was not just a song, but the United States government literally bombed an entire block in Philadelphia, and some of the persons who survived that are still walking around with the scars from that. And so Mama Pam Africa is going to join us later in the season to talk about, this is the 40th year anniversary of that bombing and of some of the work that the MOVE organization is doing. She could not be with us tonight, but she did make an introduction to this warrior sister who we're so excited to have here. And so Nana Njinga, you've been listening, you saw the film yourself, jump right in and tell us your thoughts without the spoilers, because we haven't gotten to that part yet.
Thank you very much for having me on. It's going to be hard not to speak without the spoilers, I tell you. There is a great positivity going on in the community right now, and I'm excited about it. The movie itself has brought us together, and we're talking about things. The original Black Panther Party's 10-point platform and program, you know, is as pertinent today as it was back then. You know, the programs we put in place back then for free health clinics, for free breakfast programs, those things are still needed in our community. And we need to continue to unify and bring those things and those needs that our communities have to the table. We need to come together and empower our own community. So the fact that this movie, Black Panther, has actually got us sitting and talking about the power to the people, for the people, power by the people, I think it's a wonderful thing.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you for sharing. You know, I in talking about sort of the mixed reviews, you know, we talked about some of the you know, positive sides and what people are saying. I do want to share some of the feedback. You know, one of our resident scholars here at Connect by Let's Buy Black 365 is Dr. Obadale Kamban. And when we asked Dr. Obadale Kamban about his take on this, his statement was that even for scholarly purposes, he was not paying to see the film because he understands the history of Walt Disney and the entire Disney entity. You know, even Walt Disney's children have come out and said, yes, he was blatantly racist. Yes, he hated Black people. Yes, he, you know, hated all these. And just like companies that are still in existence after profiting from slavery, you know, the legacy of Disney is one that has profited from the exploitation of Black people. And so his sentiment, and there are those around the country who have the same sentiment, is one that I think is very poignant. I wish we could have gotten an actual quote from him, but he talked about this is the modern day equivalent of everyone flocking to the white baseball fields, white-owned baseball fields when Jackie Robinson went in because they were so starved to see a Black face, and they were willing to let the Negro Leagues die because, you know, this is new, and look at the doors it will open up, and look at what will happen, and it's such an opportunity. And we didn't realize that had we just redirected our dollars in that level of mass patronage to the Negro Leagues, we would have been able to build that empire in our own likeness. And so we definitely want to acknowledge that. My family had a big discussion around that on Saturday after I saw the film for this interview. I said it was one of the best films I ever saw, and my parents were going to go see it. What ended up happening is after that discussion and listening to my brother say that he was not going to give a dime to companies that are invested in our oppression like Disney, my parents actually sold back their tickets to the theater that they were going to see it. And my mother, I'm going to share this message because I was really incredibly touched by it. But she said, Aja, meaning my dad, Aja and I didn't realize that this is a Disney production. Therefore, given all that we know about Disney, we will not be going. Instead, we will send the ticket money to our children who are steadfast on the path to fight for and to liberate our people. Although the tickets didn't cost that much, we'll be sending each of you some money on Monday. Tell us how best to send. And I think that's a very interesting take because if we look at what is needed in the Black community and what messages are out there, we also have to realize that this has been a signal to every company that has blatantly and intentionally done damage to the Black community, that if you just do it really well and look really good while you're doing it, Black people will forgive all of that and drop their money right at your feet.
That's true.
And I think that's a really, really important message. And so, you know, I thought I was doing something because I saw the film at the Magic Johnson Theater and I was like, it's Black owned. But I think we do need to be mindful that if we are talking about Black economic empowerment, we do need to be very mindful of every place that we spend our money.
That's absolutely right. And it has to be, because I was feeling that same way too, just about knowing the history behind Disney and, you know, with their empire that they're building now and how many companies they're taking over and stuff like that. And with that mentality, it's like, wow, yeah, like you are contributing to your own dilapidation just in the community. And, you know, to that point, it's like you have another line of thinking in that, you know, masses of people have to start somewhere, right? And you have some that may think, well, we understand that, but they may justify it and say, okay, well, we pay cell phone bills every month, right? Or we'll pay like the lighting bill and things of that nature. So this is interesting that Mama and Baba was, you know, adopted this philosophy, because that has been something that I've been trying to just figure out in my own right. To see exactly where to go with that.
And I think the distinction with things like cell phones, because we always hear, well, there are no Black utility companies, there are no, you know, Black airports, but we're not. This is, you know, when you look at Latino communities, you know, we always have to, in order to really understand the context, for some reason, we always have to compare it to someone else. There are lots of communities that don't own the utility companies, that don't own the airports, but they are able to organize around themselves economically. And especially when it comes to media, they are very clear about where they get it and very clear about what they will and will not consume. And so I think we can differentiate the things that are created for us and by us and make positive choices. I was actually going to go see the film again this weekend, but after that, I was like, okay, you know, I guess I'm not going to see it. And then and be able to make those and not feel like it's a sacrifice, because what I'm recognizing is I am taking money away from again, as we always say, taking money away from things that oppress us and putting it towards something more for Black liberation.
If I may?
Yes,
yeah, so also keep in mind, this is not just a Disney production, it's a Marvel production. And Marvel Comics also has a history in terms of the way it's represented Black folk in the past. You know, you go back to the 1940s, 50s, and so forth. There have been, you know, questionable representations of Black folk throughout the years. This is the same company. I don't know how many of your listeners are familiar with it, but it's the same company that gave us a character by the name of Whitewash, you know, with the Young Allies back in the 1940s, very stereotypical representation. And there have been some other things that have happened. Luke Cage has been problematic when you go back to the earliest incarnations of that character. But going back to your point, what Black folk also need to remember is if we're supporting the Black Panther in that manner, there are a bunch of Black comic book creators that are out here every day selling, you know, their comics, their property, and they've never had to be convinced to show us in a positive light. They've been doing it from day one. You know, so, you know, with my company, we held a Black comic book convention. You know, we featured Black comic book artists and so forth. And one of the things that I get from a lot of Black comic book artists is when they attend these conventions, these large conventions, they said a lot of Black customers walk right by them and act like they're not even there. This direct feedback from these artists, and they're telling me this. So, you know, if you go into, you know, these major comic book conventions, some of the smaller ones, make sure that if you gave, you know, your ticket money to Black Panther, now let's go out and support some of these smaller comic book companies that these Black creators, we're talking about Black economics, these Black creators, you know, they've been doing, like I said, for a very long time, and they need to be supported as well.
That's an excellent point, because if we are trying to have economic empowerment and we are telling people to not spend their money at Marvel and with Disney, then we have authors and illustrators and writers who have the same, if not much better work that's done that can end up turning into a production like a Black Panther if we just support them.
Right. I was going to ask for you to share comic books, and I was thinking, you know, we've highlighted some of the video clips from Professor Griff on the show, and he actually has a comic book out that I purchased. I haven't given it to him yet. My nephew is 5. So I haven't given it to him yet, but I'm very excited to be able to give my nephew this comic book with all images that look like him, from someone written by him. I know it was produced in the Black community, et cetera, et cetera. Can you talk a little bit about some of those comic books that are out there, and even your book, which I think deals with some of these issues?
Yes, excellent, thanks. Yeah, so if you go back, you look at what they call a father of Black comics. This is Orange C. Evans. It's 1940, 46, where he comes up with all Negro comics. It's the first time you have a Black comic book publisher, okay, where he's putting out a fair representation and so forth. So we talk about Black comics, you got to go back to him. Then in more recent times, Brother Man has been around for a long time. It was just added to the African American History Museum, like within the last couple of months or so. You also have, I'm just going to mention a few companies if folks are interested. You have Advent. You have Kid Comics, you have Unique Studios, you have PB Soldier. There are a whole host of Black comic book creators out there. You got Night Seeker and so forth. If you frequent these comic book conventions, you will find these comic book creators and artists there. And also, if you just go online, on my website, I feature a lot of Black comic book artists and so forth. There's a Black superhero museum where they will give you a whole list of Black comic book companies and so forth. So it's out there. And like I said, if they just got 10% of what the Black people just got, you know what I'm saying? Because what you don't want to happen is you don't want to see these Black comic book creators get to a point where they're going to take money from anyone to, continue to survive. Right. And then it leaves our community. But if we can support them from day one, then we'll get the representation that we want, both in front of and behind the camera. And like I said, it'll be Black owned and so forth. So we don't have to worry about all those other things that you just mentioned.
And you talk about the history of these Black comic book characters and the comic books and the history of the industry overall in your book. And that book is titled
So this is the Ex-Con, Voodoo Priest, Goddess, and the African King. And it's an analysis of Black comic book characters, mostly from the companies that people are most familiar with, Marvel and DC. But I do touch upon some other smaller companies and some examples and so forth that folks may not be familiar with. So I go from 1895 is when you have the first appearance of a Black character in an American comic strip. Okay, and that's also the year of Plessy versus Ferguson. So at the same time, we're being marginalized by the courts. We're being marginalized on pages of comics. So I go from 1895 to contemporary times, and then I analyze Luke Cage, Papa Midnight, Black Panther, and Storm.
Okay. And, it's interesting that you draw the parallel because, if we look at what's going on in the present day, you have a lot of people who feel like that, racism or overt racism, because racism has never gone anywhere in the history of this country, but overt racism is at an all-time high. And there's so many things going on that we have seen historically when that happens in the community, and when people are talking about organizing and what are we going to do, that historically there has always been the introduction of some figure to distract people from what's going on, and where film or music or something has created that escapism path. And so it's very interesting, with the political climate that we have, with the stories that are happening, that now, people are feeling good about living in this country again, which is a very interesting concept when you look at nothing happened to you as a Black person from Thursday to today. Like your life is not fundamentally different, but you somehow feel better without actual substantive change.
Well, once again, I don't want to get into spoilers, but there's one character in the movie that
we can transition. Before we transition, Nana Njenga, I did want to ask you, we're talking about Black heroes, and we just heard about the history of some of the Black superheroes from comic books. Can you I mean, we can't cover, of course, the 40 years, but can you talk a little bit about some of the Black Panthers and the whole political prisoner just epidemic that has happened in this country, where Black voices have been literally jailed for standing up for Black liberation, and the role that the Black Panthers has played in that movement?
Yes. What I would like to say is that we have approximately 16 Black Panther political prisoners that are still down under or in exile outside of this country. Mumia Abu-Jamal, 34 years. Jamal Alameen, he's doing 16 years now. That's age wrapped around. Herman Bell, 43. Sathiata, 43. Romaine Fitzgerald, 46 years. Kendi Whitmore, 36 years. Rochelle McGee, 53 years. Pete O'Neill is out of this country and has been in exile for 46 years. Asada is the most wanted woman in the world. $2 million on her head, you know, and she's been in exile in Cuba. And the list goes on. Kamal Siddiqui, he's been in 12 years, and he was out, and then they rearrested him 12 years ago, and he's sick. Mumia Abu-Jamal is sick, and Mumia has a trial coming up on the 27th of March that we should all be coming to the court in Philadelphia to be in support and in protest of them keeping him down under. It's that these are real superheroes.
Right.
They have done stupendous things just for our community, and they can't be forgotten. So my excitement about everybody coming back to the table, everybody talking and the hype about the Black Panther movie is throwing again on the political prisoners down under. And I would like to see come of this is that the community starts to sit down and help us extract these brothers and sisters out of their condition. That we also start to do things positive in our community. There's always going to be those things that are not so great about movies and things like that, and you know, and the capitalism and the imperialism and all that. But the bright side is that if we can now discuss it and start to do some things positive toward it, then we can just keep moving on. And there'll be the time that we'll have all those things that we need to have so that we'll be telling our own stories all the time.
Right. You know, that brings up an incredible article that we're going to share on Connect and also Abibi Tumikasa. It was an article that was written on African Holocaust, and it talked about the film, who made the film, Black Panther, and then it also got into some of the detail about real Black Panthers. There was also another article that we're going to share with the viewers and the listeners that really highlights some of the individuals. In fact, that poster that I showed of some of the Black Panthers, they go in detail with a list of both living and ancestor Black Panthers and warriors and political prisoners who have been fighting for us. And so I think, you know, I am proud that with so much injustice in this country and with so many people feeling like we're powerless, that there are these warriors, elders, leaders. You know, we say, oh, when is there going to be a Black leader? These are our warriors, elders, and leaders. But, you know, networks like ABC, which are owned by Disney, are not going to tell you about Black leaders who they are imprisoning through the prison industrial complex. You know, most of these companies are heavily invested in things that are for our oppression. So they're not going to turn around and put on the news, you know, something counter to that. So let's transition and get to some of the spoilers. So if you have not seen the film and you want to see the film,
change the station.
I will recommend, well, I guess I shouldn't say be creative about it, but be very considerate of where and how you spend your money, given what we just talked about. And also post on Connect or send us an email or a message. If you have done a personal embargo and you have said that you're not spending your money to finance this film and finance the movie, we want to hear from you. And if you have comments or questions, post those. We'll try and address some of those as well. But yeah, so we'll transition to some of the imagery. And so again, spoiler alert starts now. So who wants to jump in first?
I just wanted to mention real quick that you know, when the comic came out, this was 1966 when Black Panther was created. So it was like a 3-month window between his creation and the Black Panther Party. Marvel was afraid that people were going to associate the superhero with the political party. So they briefly changed his name. And for a while, he was the Black Leopard. And they gave him spots in the whole nine, but people weren't into that. They weren't buying that. So they had to switch back. And then there was one issue, I believe it was in the page of Daredevil, where Black Panther meets this Black Panther type organization called the Thunderbolts. And it was like one panel. It's basically him just shaking their hand saying, I like the work that you do. So they were aware of the connection, but they were afraid that the connection might be too strong. So as best they could, they tried to make sure that folks knew that the Black Panther comic was not to be associated with the organization.
Right. This is entertainment, not empowerment. We want you to be very clear about that.
Exactly.
Okay. So who wants to go first?
Okay. Yeah, so what I found interesting with the film was this conversation, this idea of, first of all, I love the villain. You cannot have a good superhero film. You cannot have a great film unless you have a great villain. And I thought in terms of Marvel films, this is one of the best villains they've ever had.
Now, who was the villain?
This was Killmonger. Okay, that's his comic book name, Eric Killmonger. And the reason why I thought he was so great was because when he was first introduced, I was like, okay, what's wrong with him? Like, why should I be rooting against this guy? And then I think they kind of figured they painted themselves into a corner. So by the end of the film, they started to make him more and more of a villain. But for a lot of the film, he was making a lot of sense where he's talking about, you know, Wakanda, you have all of this technology. Where have you been for Black folk in the United States and other parts of the world? Why haven't you done anything with this power that you have? So I thought he raised some very interesting questions. He challenges, you know, Wakanda, its leadership, its history, and the Black Panther, by the end of the film, kind of picked up on some of his ideas, you know, and recognized, hey, we can do something. But like I said, I thought Killmonger was just a great character.
Yeah, and when you said that, it kind of, and I hate to draw this comparison, but it kind of reminded me a little bit about like Malcolm X and, you know, MLK, and just how the revolutionary rhetoric and practice that Malcolm was so known for, and just like really just overturning the system. Like there's no, you know, plan with it. You got to overturn it. And then the influence that both Malcolm and Martin had on each other, but in particular with this, how the influence of Killmonger had on T'Challa, which is the Black Panther's character, and eventually understanding that, no, if we have all these resources, then we need to, no, not to his extent that he did, but, you know, we need to help our brothers and sisters out because we can change the whole dynamic of this thing.
Yeah, so I'm going to jump in with feedback and critical. And I want to credit Sister, because I thought of it on this level, but not as deep, Sister Kamani, who is activist with Less by Black 365, commented, and she said, you know, the whole purpose of superhero movies and sci-fi is that it doesn't have to necessarily be rooted in reality. I mean, flying cars and all that, like it is fantasy. And with that being said, it could have been fantastical in that, you know, Killmonger who I don't like that term, you know, the most Pan-African idealistic person I've ever seen on film or television, who was 100% for saving Black people at any cost, which also, you know, we saw on the other side, they were about saving Wakanda at any cost, is flawed to such an extent that he can't overcome some of his, you know, personal issues to make sure that Black liberation trumps, you know, infighting.
Right.
And I had a problem. I literally cried. Apparently no one else I've talked to has. But when I saw the fighting between the people, I mean, I was just like, wait, what is happening here? Black people are killing each other. Why?
Exactly.
And if this is fantasy land, then why do we have to have the violence, the infighting, and all that? What I would have, you know, if it's a fantasy and we can create the fantasy, why could it not have been that reality check before we start fighting? Like, wait a second, we're all Black people and we're not the enemy. Let's have a reality check. Let's figure out how we're going to do this. Who cares who has the freaking title of king? Let's come together, which is what Ape Man and forgive me for not remembering his actual name, M'Baku, you know, ultimately did. I loved his character because he was like, yeah, I'm mad at you. Yeah, I got an attitude. Yeah, I lost. But one, I understand that my role as a leader is to not let my personal feelings get in the way of the bigger picture, which is why he didn't let him die. And so I did love the balance between, okay, I'm not going to let him die, but also I'm not going to help you, because he saw it as personal, and then recognizing, wait, this is beyond personal. This is about us as a people, the coming together. So that coming together, since the story was fantastical, could have happened at any time. And why could it not have happened before the Pan-Africanist who was trying to liberate all oppressed people died?
Well, like, did you want to?
Oh, no, please.
So one of the things, keep in mind, if you look at the history of like television, Black television in particular, the revolutionary characters always represented to that extreme, and is always mocked. I mean, if you want to go all the way back, you look at like Good Times, and the way that, you know, you had the little Michael Evans character, and he was the revolutionary character when he was younger. Now he grew up, he changed, but as a younger person, he was always mocked. You know, he was, and they also had to get a lines to a child, because if they give it to an adult, it would be taken too seriously. Then you look at all these other representations where you would have these Pan-Africanist, Black Panther revolutionary types on television. Oftentimes they would be mocked, and by the end of the show, they were quote unquote wrong. You know, I remember there was an episode,
which is effectively, especially in men, it's the media equivalent of emasculating a Black man and making him completely impotent.
I remember, what was it, Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. There was one episode where like the aunt came to visit. You know, she was a revolutionary type. By the end of the episode, she was quote unquote like the wrong person. You know what I'm saying? So they've done this. And if you look at old sitcoms with Black folk, they've done this time and time again. So this was no different. However, what is interesting in terms of the Black Panther in the comic, okay, especially in recent issues, the problem has always been him being a king in Wakanda. So they kind of kept that in the film as well.
It would have been good to see, and I guess I don't know how, well, sticking with the fantasy part, in Fantasyland, it would have been good to see if they were able to reconcile somehow to be able to rule and just get rid of, like you said, the titles and stuff. Or if T'Challa was going to rule, then at least he would fully adopt his principles of, because another aspect of Killmonger, Jordan's character, that I didn't like was how he yoked up the aunt the elder when he told her to burn the flowers, and just the respect aspect of that. You know, outside of that, everything he was dropping knowledge about where the masks were from when he had that interaction with the woman at the museum, and even did y'all catch the the part where he said you're worried about the wrong, it was something to the effect of you're worried about the wrong thing. You need to be worried about what's in your body.
The
drink. And I just thought that was dope because of the product that was used, that she was drinking from.
Right.
I'm like, yo.
Right.
Right. And so,
but let me say this: wasn't that part that you're talking about? Wasn't he actually referring to the fact that she was drinking, but his girlfriend, when she excused herself and said she was taking a break, she must have been the one.
Yeah.
Or assumption that she must have been the one to put whatever it was in that woman's drink.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Definitely.
That's I don't think that goes in contradiction to what I was thinking as well, because I was thinking that too, that the girlfriend has something to do with it, but I just thought it was interesting, that double meaning. Was it double entendre? About you have the product that she was drinking, in addition to the fact that you had the girlfriend put something in it. So you got these security people around me watching me, but you need to be watching what you're putting in your body.
And so, that I would say is flaw number one for me. True Pan-Africanists are respectful of women. So you have him, in one sense, I could see him shooting the girlfriend. If this is, if shooting you is going to get us all to Black liberation, but he didn't have to kill her. So you've got him killing Black women. You've got him assaulting others. You have him killing an elder and spiritual leader. You just have all of these images where, a true Pan-Africanist who is who's thinking of liberation on this scale, you would not get that behavior. And so I think them putting it all together and then having it where, his actual name is T'Chaka. I'm not saying it. Ndajaka.
N'Jaku, was it?
I can't pronounce it right. It's Jakada, but anyway, he's not called his African name. He's now referred to as Killmonger, and now you have Pan-Africanism, crazy villain, are the images that are tied together. Well, and that is problematic.
I think they had to do that so that you would root against him. Because had he not done those things you just mentioned, then more people would have sided with him. And still, even with all of that, there's a whole lot of folk that still, we listen to the discussion around the movie, that side with him. So that's one of the things to keep in mind. And also, I think the reason why he behaved the way that he did was because he didn't come up in Wakanda. And his father died before his father could teach him those things. So, remember, when his father died, he was a young boy. So you also have to look at how he was raised. So remember, he was raised up in the American military system. Because after that scene where he burns all the flowers.
Where you're brainwashed from the beginning.
And Ross, the white character, Ross from the CIA, explains, this is what we trained him to do. So it's like he's that Pan-Africanist, but he wasn't raised really in the spirit of it. He was raised by American values and American military system. So I think that's part of the reason why he's behaving the way that he does. And the filmmaker, I think, very wisely makes a point of saying that, like, he's this way because he ran down the list. I fought in Afghanistan. I fought in Iraq. I was a black ops. I was this, that, and the third. That's where all that killing is coming from. That's not the Wakandan side of it. That's that other side.
Wow. And it reminds me, now that you say that, of like continental African leaders now who may have certain experience and training within the West and then go and adopt that same, because you may start off with like a Pan-African approach, but then as you remain in power, like you start to adopt those Western ideologies and you lose your Africanness. So that's how you can have just the opposite of Wakanda's resources being used for the people.
Speaking of resources, that brings me to issue number 2 that I have with the film. Africa is the source of all the world's global resources. But in this film, it's got to come from a meteor crashing, and that's why Africa is rich, because some external thing. And it reminds me of the what is the film? Is it Birth of a Nation? No. There's a famous film, and I'll have to throw it up in the re-edits, but where they talk about the pyramids were built by aliens, and extraterrestrial. Okay.
Chariots of the Gods.
And it's that whole concept that, you know, the only reason Africa is great is because some alien force came in.
Right.
It can't be that Africa is inherently great and that the people in Africa created the, you know, this. And so that was my second issue with the film. My third issue was there was so much talk about why we as Wakandans can't go out and help everybody because we've got to protect this at all costs. We have to keep it a secret. We have to do all this, and this. But one white guy takes a bullet, and it's okay to not just bring him back, but to let him, because I said, why couldn't he wake up in Mexico and not know how he got there? Like, you bring him back and bring him into the lair and then explain everything. I'm like, so the black people in the hood, the baby boy who's your nephew can't come back, but this good white guy can come back and get all the secrets and be part of the military.
Yeah.
I mean, the good white character was I probably should have put that that's probably up there with Pan-Africanism, but that's definitely flaw number 3 for me.
That was what I was alluding to earlier when I couldn't talk about the spoiler. But just the aspect of having them there, because even it didn't, and I was trying to look through the comics to see if he had a tie with that or something, but it just didn't make sense in my estimation for him still being there. It's like they still could have accomplished what they were trying to accomplish without that character there. But again, this goes back to supporting the illustrators, the writers that look like you, because you would end up with a different story and you won't have to appeal to, you know, these production companies that may write that in there just because they want to be able to have this, you know, great white hope that is able to save the Wakandans.
Now, the Ross character was created in the page of the comic.
It was? Okay.
Yeah, so you go back to Christopher Priest's run is when you introduce Everett K. Ross. So, and I also think in order to keep the movie moving, so to speak, there were certain things they felt like they had to do, because also keep in mind that this film is a part of a bigger Marvel universe, and there had to be some connection between, other than in addition to the Civil War film, there had to be some other way that the Panther connects with, you know, the greater Marvel universe. So I get your points, because I was sitting there the same way in terms of, you know, because when it was funny, I was watching the film with a coworker on Thursday, and Shuri begins to explain to him vibranium, it's all over the place, all over. He leans over, she's talking too much. You know, she explained everything. You know, but you know, so it was interesting. Yeah, that you know, he leaned right over and said, man, why is she telling him everything? But I think part of that is to kind of keep the narrative going in terms, like I said, the film itself, keeping true to some of its comic book roots. But at the same time, it could have been someone else. Because like Shuri said, one thing I love was she referred to him as colonizer.
Yes, I thought
that was awesome. Like she referred to him as colonizer. And in many of the scenes, Ross wasn't allowed to talk. When he goes before,
He tried to chime in. He was like, "You are not gonna watch. You ain't gonna talk."
Exactly. He tried to chime in. They were like, "You shouldn't even be in this room,
right?
You know, you just hush." So I thought that those were the ways that they were kind of able to deal with that white presence. But at the same time, he said, ultimately goes back to the good white character savior type of thing.
What were your thoughts, Nana Njinga?
Yes. What did you say? I'm sorry.
As did you want to chime in with any of your thoughts on any of these or one of the flaws that you recognized from the film?
You know, I think that fiction and real culture coming together, that film will give food for thought. And I'm hoping that it will make people do some more investigative thinking and looking at stuff. We have always been connected to Mother Earth. So those herbs, you know, we've always had a connection with that. So that's some real with some fiction. And spiritually, we've always been taught and encouraged to relate to our ancestors, you know, and seek our ancestors spiritually for our development and growth. That was shown fact and fiction. So there was some very negative things there, but there were some very positive things there. And I'm hoping that people will decide to do some more investigating about what is really our culture.
Right. That brings up a good point. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, so I mean, it's things like that, you know, that I'm hoping that the young kids that are watching it will go and investigate and really check out political prisoners and real heroes and sheroes, you know, because they want to emanate being that themselves. So I'm hoping that they'll do some investigating and some research. You know, this is modern technology age. Right. You know, you can hit the phone and you can ask these questions. You can ask about the political prisoners. You know, you can, you know, there's things that we can do. I hope that that the conversation that comes out from all this movie thing will highlight and put us back to working in our communities.
Right.
I just can't stress that enough.
Yes. And as people do their own research, that brings me to issue number 4 that I had with the film, which was the scarification. Yes. And the way that was used, because when I saw the preview, which I didn't, I'll be honest, I really wasn't interested in this film at all. And I was only seeing it because you were coming in and all that. And so I didn't really analyze it, but I did notice the scarification in the preview. And my original thought is, wow, what kind of history? I was thinking this was going to be some kind of griot character who had this history that he was sharing, because that's usually what scarification represents. You know, it's memory, it's ancestral memory, it's rooting you in culture, it's rooting you in history. And to have them take something that is so important in African community and turn it into what most people will now and forever recognize as, you know, battle scars and, you know, the equivalent of like gang members' teardrop tattoos, I found incredibly disrespectful, incredibly insulting, and incredibly damaging to the image of one thing that we have as part of our African traditional spirituality. And so, yeah, I found that very problematic. But to your point, Nana, in Jenga, I think hopefully what this will do is that we won't just walk away and say Killmonger. We'll walk away and say, okay, let's explore more about the significance of certain patterns in African clothes and what they mean, and how, how certain patterns are supposed to reflect different things. Let's look at scarification and what it's really used for. Let's look at African spirituality and what we've been told is voodoo or all of these negative kinds of things, and look at how it's actually been used as a tool for liberation for Black people for millennia, and go from there. So I think that's a really good point, that we not take this movie as fact or history or any of that, and we recognize that, you know, there may be things that we're seeing in this film that we have got to do a deep dive from an African-centered perspective and from a Black revolutionary perspective to really understand. And that I think it also helps create dialogues, because that means that you're going to probably have to get off social media and go to elders in your community, go to leaders in your community, go outside of your general social circle and see who may have this kind of information in a meaningful way where you can actually learn from it.
Yeah. And to that point too, just about doing further research and everything, one of the things that I did like about the imagery of it was, because as I was watching, I'm just thinking, you have these young girls that are coming up in this society that don't necessarily see constant positive imagery of them. Yeah. So to see a film that had the sister, well, first of all, had the king, all of his advisors, like the strong people that were around him and influencing him, were women. Right. And then to see, like, you had an engineer, scientist as one, you had you know, the two warrior women that were like the strongest ones there, and then the queen mother. It's like, you know, that positive imagery with regard to the women and the role that they played, I thought would be something that, you know, girls can look up to and say, hey, you know, I want to do that. I want to be that. And that can change. That has a lasting impact on them.
The film couldn't have happened without the women.
Yes, absolutely.
Like they drove the whole story.
Yeah,
because like you mentioned, Killmonger's girlfriend playing a significant role. Perhaps she's the one that put, you know, poison in the drink. She was there. Just there was an ongoing thing with women. I also think it spoke to the beauty of Black women because, I mean, you talk about the Black Panther in the middle of a fight.
They were.
He freezes up when he looks at, you know, he looks at his lady, he's like, oh my God, I can't even move right now. You know, and I love the scene where they're going into the casino in Korea, and she's wearing this wig, and it looks ridiculous. And she says it. She's like, "This is ridiculous." So she's letting you know you don't need this. So one of the first things she does is discards it.
I know.
Like, she gets rid of it. Like,
she's like, I can't even fight for my people if I am wearing this on my head.
So
I love that.
It doesn't fall off in the middle of the fight. She purposely tears it off, uses it as a weapon, throws it in the guy's face. So I think all of those subtle things are great in terms of what they were doing for women. And at the very end, when it looked like the women, you know, were backed into a corner, and M'Baku's group shows up. If you remember, you saw the women from his group jump into the fight. So it wasn't even like, oh, the men are coming to save the day. No, there were women that were part of that army as well. So there was a great thing there, just showing that side of women in that history.
Right. Which I would say would bring me to criticism number 6, though. And again, want to give a shout out to Kamani, who is the only other person who I talked to who also saw this. I actually had a slight problem with the role of the women, not in their role, but in the fact that their role was so strong that this man who was supposed to be king and ruler and leader was almost powerless without the women. And we see that narrative all the time in images created by white people with Black men, where the men are impotent and the Black women have all the power. And so as a king, for him to always freeze and not be able to make moves, to not be able to make decisions, like we don't see white superheroes that are that impotent and unable to lead, and even, you know, to have his other subjects, forgive me, the brother from Get Out who was in there, you know, you know, commented like, your dad was the same. So it was like, your dad was impotent. Now you're impotent. Neither one of you can lead. What are we doing here? You know, I think that's a problematic story that we've never seen. I mean, they'll have superheroes who have weaknesses, but it's not a weakness in leadership. So, you know, Batman may have his issues and he's alone in the thing, but he's not, you know, unable to lead and be Batman. And so I found that incredibly problematic. And when we start creating our own superhero movies, I'm looking forward to seeing where there's a balance of power, which is how it truly is in traditional African culture, where both the men and the women are complementing forces where they can't lead or exist without each other.
Now, I will say this, in the Marvel films, you know, if you go back and look at them, there have been other heroes that haven't been able to operate without their female counterpart. If you go back and you look at the Iron Man movie, you know, he really hasn't been able to function, you know, without, you know, his female counterpart. So she plays a huge role, especially by Iron Man 3, where she actually ends up saving him. So Marvel has, I think they began to recognize that there's a growing and very vocal community of women within the comic book culture that, you know, are watching these stories and paying attention. So in other Marvel films, you're starting to see that, where these female characters who in the pages of the comic books, when you go back years ago, were in the background. In more recent times, they have become more and more prominent. Like I said, Iron Man is a great example of the female character who, like I said, by Iron Man 3, literally saves him. Like, he would not have survived had it not been for her. So there is some precedent there with other characters, but it's just that, and this goes back to me for representation. One burden that Black films, Black characters have that white characters don't have is there's so few of us that we get burdened with all, like taking responsibility of telling all of the stories at one time. Whereas with white characters, because there's so many, you know, you can be the hero, you can be the villain, you can be, you know, the dumb guy, you can be whatever, because there's always another white character to kind of pick up the slack. So with the black characters, I get it that, you know, they carry an immense amount of weight, but at the same time, you know, the story had to play out a certain type of way. So I think that might have been part of it.
But I think Hollywood is very clear on how it portrays black men. And it was very clear. I mean, I don't know who the social scientists were who worked on this film, but I think every decision was deliberate. And I'm sure of it. I mean, there's no way that you can get that. I mean, that money and that film was like scientifically put together. You know, just the psychology behind. I mean, there were so many different layers to the aesthetic of that film that I am sure it was a choice that didn't have to be. And again, if you go back to the concept of this is a fantasy, so. It's not a fantasy that there are not strong black men, but what does it say that the choice was deliberate, that the women will be so strong and the man will be powerless, and even his predecessor, his father, is powerless, and, you know, the power balance is, you know, completely disrupted there. So even if there is a precedent in a couple of characters, like you said, there are many examples, but I don't think that absolves them from the perpetuation of this same subtle narrative that black men can't be in power, black men can't lead, black men can't. So I don't let them off the hook, regardless of how many other white characters have had that. But I do see your point. I do see your point.
Well, it could have been worse. You mentioned Hancock earlier. I don't know if you've seen that movie, but it wasn't that situation, thankfully, you know, where Hancock's losing his power in the presence of a white female character. You know, so at least with the Panther, they kept it black. So, you know, but with the scarification thing, what I took from that was his warped sense of African culture. That's the way I looked at it. Was that rather than look at scarifications the way you described it, having real cultural roots, because of his upbringing and because he didn't have that knowledge, he warped it. And I think for a lot of black folk in this country, and if not around the world, you see that a lot. Where we take something that is African in nature, based in African culture, but because we don't have the understanding, we warp it some. You know, so I think for me, I think that's why he did what he did. But if it can lead a young person to say, well, what is scarification? What does that really mean? If that causes them to go to the library, causes them to go read a book on the subject, then I would say he's accomplished, you know, the filmmaker has accomplished his goal.
Do you think that's where people are going? I mean, I mean, again, the fact that he's not referred to by his African name, the fact that he is Killmonger, the fact that he is crazy, that he dies for a cause that, you know, I don't know that people are going to go, well, let me analyze why he did that and see that, oh, wow, there's this whole other side. You know, typically what we see is that becomes the image for X as it's represented. It's usually, you know, people aren't necessarily going in with a pen and paper like, I'm going to do a deeper research on this thing later. Or even know what it is. You know, you don't hear talk about scarification. I mean, I've been in a couple of settings where you see some people with the scar under their eye and people are like, well, what is that? And there's, you know, superficial conversations. But I don't know that masses of people are going to go, oh, there is actually a positive imagery associated with this. And so when you look at it from a big picture, I think it does damage to our self-image of a deeply rooted spiritual tradition.
It's a similar situation to a lot of backlash that has been going on with the brothers and sisters showing up in traditional wears too, as far as from the continental community. If you from Ghana, Kenya, you know, your African countries where people have said, oh, well, you're mixing different like patterns and, you know, you don't understand this aspect. And it's like, how disrespectful is this and stuff like that. So it just begs and brings a bigger question to the table as far as like, hopefully And even in addition to that, the fact that you had Jordan Killmonger's character versus who was the African of the West versus T'Challa's the continental African, and you had that dynamic. So it's a lot of stereotypical issues that were in the film, and hopefully it will allow a dialogue as far as just the holistic approach to that and breaking down barriers to say, like, look, there are more similarities than there are differences amongst us. So let's start to figure it out. Let's start to sit down and talk about it.
Well, like, to that point, one of the great things for me that I'm seeing is I've been called to schools to talk about these things now because of this book, because of this story. There are people that do want to know. So, for example, just yesterday, I did a presentation before the students even went to see the film. So they asked me to come in to speak to a group of students, and I've been called to speak to other schools and other groups of students and so forth. So it is opening the door, and I think you are going to see more and more people start to discuss the things that were in the film and try to get it right. So going back to your point of what people were wearing to the theater, that's exactly what Killmonger did. You know what I'm saying? He didn't have full understanding of it. So it was somewhat warped. And I think that if you have people on the continent that are saying, that's disrespectful, well, now it's time to explain it.
Exactly.
You know what I'm saying? Now it's time for us to get it right. But it wouldn't have happened without this film. So once again, if that's what comes out of this, if it starts off a little, off center, and then that's it, I think that would be a good thing.
That has been my position. That's what I've been saying. And what I contribute to this conversation is that there'll be things that we will not like about this movie, but there'll be so much that we'll decide to look into it a little bit deeper. What is real? What's not real? Those conversations will come up. I think that our people are stronger minded about these things. I think that they'll go and they will do the research. They will go and look up things on the internet. They will, try to figure out, what's true and what's not true, and how much is fiction and how much is fantasy. I think the educational portion of this and going into the schools and talking to the students, and just like this conversation is here, out in our communities and in our different venues, it'll bring about good conversation, and I think it'll bring some change in the community.
And Nana, excuse me. One thing that I remembered when preparing for this conversation tonight is I was looking at an interview that Lupita did, and Lupita's character is the love interest, Nakia. But she was
love interest.
Love interest. She was talking about how in the making of the film they had this one particular. Well, once they broke, they took a break. They said the young kids were drumming, so apparently it was the waterfall scene. So the young kids were drumming and they were playing like one of Snoop's songs. And she said that everybody, was dancing. And then she said the film, she enjoyed making it because it was so Pan-African. She said that she saw Africans from Zimbabwe, Ghana, Kenya, Tanzania, South Carolina, North Carolina, New York, like just start naming off so many different, people. And she said that's the aspect that she really loved just about making the film.
Well, the last two things that I wanted to share for the critical deconstruction part. And so, these are so that if you are going to do a deeper dive on these things, you can kind of reflect and not just take it at face value. Like I said, it was one of the best. I mean, it was the best film I've ever seen. But even in saying that, I am very mindful of the imagery it has for Black people and some of the subtle and subconscious notions that are planted within the film. And we need to be mindful of those. And yes, internet research is one thing. I'm going to say, put down the computer and get in your community and talk to real humans, because there's only so much we can get from internet research and YouTubing you cannot YouTube your way into self-knowledge. That's 100%. One thing in our community is, the role of the storyteller, the elder, the griot, is not one that can be translated into a very, two-dimensional plane. And in order for communities to really be communities, we can't just be siloed and attached to computers in doing that. So I think doing some cursory research there is and can be important. But this conversation, if we're really talking about true Pan-Africanism, has got to leave the digital plane and go into the real world. With that, I would just share that my final critique of the film is it goes back to T'Challa and leadership. Everywhere else in the world, in fiction and in fantasy, when you have leaders, they lead by doing, and they lead by saying, this is how we are going to do it. The second ending, or the ending that showed after the credits, with him going and kind of, it almost, it wasn't begging, but it was almost like, we're going to show you how to do this. That's not what leaders do. That's not how any current world leader does. I haven't seen that in a film where leaders are like, we're going to show you how we can go together. And that's the same kind of narrative that's always put in the Black community. The kind of kumbaya approach, as opposed to, we're going to stand, we're going to lead, we're going to take over, we're going to do it. And you all are coming with us because we know we're standing in right. And so, that kind of goes back to the comment earlier about, the men not having that leadership role and then not even being able to speak it. It's just kind of like, well, you'll see. And that's not the role that kings play.
That's the point.
Yeah, well, I just think
on that male, man.
What'd you say?
You're very tough. You're tough on that male. You're that mailman. You're pretty tough on that.
I
didn't see him as a weak character. I didn't see him as a character who didn't know how to lead. I saw him as a character who had respect for women, and he respected their opinion enough to heed to some of the things that they said, and to listen to their guidance, and at the end part that I saw was that he went back and he bought that building and building a car so that he could and name it for the brother's father who had passed away, that kind of thing, and the whole thing of respecting the fact that Killmonger, that he was angry because his father was murdered, and that led, and he also felt, the king felt bad about the fact that he didn't bring the young man back to the continent where he could have got that, and that was his way of going back and giving back to the community, setting up a community program, just like Panther set up community programs. I didn't see it as a negative. I saw him as a strong leader, not as a weak man.
Well, one thing I did like is that the solution, given that it was a fantasy, it could have been a global solution to end the oppression of all Black people everywhere. They could have done that. They didn't. But in not doing that, I do appreciate the fact that the solution was something that any one of us can do right now within our community to create empowerment. And so I do like that it was a tangible, realistic solution that is palatable and digestible and realistic, especially for persons in our community who have separated themselves and not been connected and not seen the need to take whatever resources I have and make sure that I am in some way, shape, or form, beyond donating to the church, be in some way, shape, or form, really deeply giving back to community, not just with dollars, but even with physical presence in some way. All right, so we're coming back to the end of our show. Definitely, any final comments before we wrap up?
Yeah, real quick, I wanted to thank you both for having me, and I wanted to give you this as a gift. And I don't know if you guys are in the T-shirts or not, but also wanted you to have these.
Oh,
Thank you so
wow.
much. I really appreciate it.
Yay! So you will see us rocking these on a future episode of Connect.
Thank you, brother.
So want to thank Nana Njinga for your lifelong service to Black liberation and for your work with the Black Panther Party. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Thank you, Brother Will, our expert Afrofuturist, who brought us all this information. And thank you to the viewers, and of course,
yes. Thank you, Nataki. Thank you.
Thank you, Talib.
Yeah.
So I'm Nataki with Connect by Let's Buy Black 365. We'll see you on another episode.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
I thought you were going to...